Hey, Farmers Branch family, time for Bible study from the big comfy chair. And we are in our study of First Maccabees in preparation for our study of the prophecy of Daniel. Yeah, I'm more comfortable in my big comfy chair here. It's actually my office chair, but anyway, uh, in preparation for our prophecy study of Daniel, it's extremely important to understand the story that Daniel's prophecy is telling, or you may terribly misinterpret what Daniel has to say. And especially when people start telling you what's going to happen in your future using the prophecy of Daniel, you really do need to understand what his amazing prophecy actually says. Now, in the 8th chapter of Daniel, he talks about a king who is taken by many to be a Antichrist in our future, when in fact it's telling the story of Antiochus Epiphanes and the Seleucid rule and the events of the Maccabean revolt. And so we need to know about this. And so now we're up to the 6th chapter of 1st Maccabees. It's also a story that's told in the 9th chapter of 2nd Maccabees with a few more details, which I'll just hit to better explain these last days of Antiochus. Now, in our study so far, Antiochus is an evil king who refers to himself as Epiphanes, or God made manifest, calls himself a god. He has established an abomination that made desolate, an abomination of desolation, one of actually two that are spoken of in Daniel's prophecy. And by placing an altar to Zeus Olympus over the altar of Jehovah in the temple at Jerusalem. Now, in our story so far, his rule has been overthrown by Judas Maccabeus and his brothers in their civil war. And he is now told of this and is going to return toward Jerusalem with the intent of genocide and another destruction of Jerusalem. However, Daniel's prophecy about him is fulfilled, and he never makes it. In Daniel's 8th chapter, the 21st verse, he says of this evil king that he will be destroyed, but not by human hands. And so we're going to read the portion of 1st Maccabees that talks about his destruction by the hand of God. So in 1st Maccabees, the 6th chapter, we'll pick up with the first verse. It says, King Antiochus was traveling through the upper provinces when he heard that Elymais, a city in Persia, was famous for its great quantities of silver and gold. Its temple was very rich and contained gold shields, breastplates, and weapons that Alexander, the son of Philip, the first Macedonian king to rule over the Greeks, or Alexander the Great, left there. So he went and tried to take the city by force and plunder it, but he was unsuccessful because the city's inhabitants knew about his plan. They resisted him in battle and he fled. With great disappointment, he planned to return to Babylon. While King Antiochus was in Persia, someone came to him and reported that the armies that had gone into the land of Judah had been thoroughly defeated. Lysias, who had gone first with a strong force, had turned and run from the Jews. The Jews then grew stronger when they took weapons, supplies, and abundant spoils from the armies they defeated. They had taken down the disgusting thing, or the abomination of desolation, that he had set upon the altar in Jerusalem. Furthermore, they had surrounded the sanctuary and also Lysias' town, Bethzur, with high walls like before. When the king heard this news, he was stunned and badly shaken. He took to his bed, sick from grief. Things hadn't turned out for him as he had planned. He lay there for many days because he was deeply depressed, and he realized that he was dying. He called his closest political advisors and said to them, "Sleep has left my eyes. I'm depressed from worrying. I say to myself, what distress I've come to, what a great flood I've now been plunged into. Once I was kind and was loved in my power." The people that actually he ruled called him Epimanes, or madman, instead of Epiphanes, God manifest. Once I was kind and was loved in my power, but now I recall the wrongs I did in Jerusalem. I seized all its silver and gold equipment. I ordered the destruction of the inhabitants of Judah without good reason. I know it's because of all this that these misfortunes have come on me. I'm here dying of bitter disappointment in a foreign land. Now, Second Maccabees tells a little bit different story. It tells how he got to that bed of despair. It appears that when he was told of the victories of the Jews, he was really angry. And in Second Maccabees, the 9th chapter, I won't go there and read it, but I'll tell you the story in short. He was really very angry and swore to destroy Jerusalem and commit genocide on the Jews. And on his way there, he was riding in a chariot when it said that God struck him with pain in his internal organs and misery, as he had inflicted on so many Jews. And so he ordered the chariot driver to drive even faster so he could get to Jerusalem to destroy it and to commit genocide against the Jews. And at that increased speed, he then fell out of the chariot and got really broken up and had to be carried on a litter from there on. And moreover, he's in a bed of despair over his injuries and his agonizing internal pains. He develops a stench so bad that nobody can carry him anywhere, be close to him or in a room with him. And even his stench became unbearable to himself. And then it says further, one translation said that worms came out of his body. Another said worms came out of his eyes. And there on his deathbed, stricken by God in a most miserable fashion and disgusting to others and even to himself, he repents. He says, I will restore the fortunes of the Jews and make them equal to Athenian citizens. He said, I will myself become a Jew, and I will restore all of the implements of the temple and repair it like it was before. I will restore them manyfold. But the writer in Second Maccabees said, but God didn't have pity on him. Apparently, he was a little less than sincere. So that's the story of how Epiphanes fulfills Daniel's amazing prophecy. So we'll read on. Then he called for one of his advisors named Philip and made him ruler over all his kingdoms. He gave him the crown, his robe, and the seal so that he might guide his son Antiochus to prepare him to be king. The king Antiochus died there in the year 149. And when Lysias found out that the king had died, he arranged for the king's son Antiochus, whom he had brought up from childhood, to rule. Lysias named him Eupator, or good father. Meanwhile, the inhabitants of the elevated fortress. Now, this is the garrison, the fortress built in the city of David, there near the Temple Mount, where the ruffians and people antagonistic to the faithful Jews had taken up. And they were constantly a source of aggravation to the Jews and to the people that tried to attend to the temple. And so it says here, meanwhile, the inhabitants of the elevated fortress kept surrounding the Israelites in the sanctuary. They were trying every way they could to harm them and strengthen the Gentiles. Judas decided to destroy them. He brought all the people together to besiege them. They assembled together, built siege towers and other war engines, and attacked the Gentiles in the year 150. However, some of the enemy forces escaped from the blockade, joined by a number of sinful Israelites. They went to the king and said, "How long will you hold back from acting justly to avenge our people? We happily served your father. We did what he said, obeying his commands. And because of this, some of our people have laid siege to the citadel and are hostile to us. Furthermore, they've killed as many of us as they could catch, and now they've taken our wealth. Judas and his forces haven't lifted their hands against us alone. They've also attacked all the neighboring lands." You remember where they were killing the Jews that lived among them. Look, today, they camped against the elevated fortress in Jerusalem to capture it. They fortified both the sanctuary and Bethzar. Unless you do something soon to prevent them, they'll do even worse things, and then you won't be able to stop them. The king was enraged when he heard this. He gathered all his chief political advisors, the commanders of his troops, and those with authority. Mercenary forces from other kingdoms and the Mediterranean islands also joined them. The total number of his forces was 100,000 army troops and 20,000 cavalry, with 32 elephants trained for war. This is the largest force that's come against the Jews to date. And now it's the son, Antiochus Eupator, who is leading the charge. They came through Idumea and camped against Bethzur. For many days they fought and constructed war engines, but the Jews would go out and burn the war engines with fire and continued to fight bravely. Then Judas marched away from the elevated fortress and camped at Beth Zechariah, opposite the king's camp. Early in the morning, the king marched out, taking his army on a forced march along the road to Beth Zechariah. His troops readied themselves for battle, and they sounded their trumpets. They aroused the elephants using grape and mulberry juices, which history tells us, and especially Josephus tells us, was fermented and spiked with some other stuff. Using grape and mulberry juices to get them ready for battle. They distributed the animals among groups of soldiers. With each elephant, they stationed 1,000 infantry wearing armor and brass helmets. 500 select cavalry were also assigned to each animal. The troops positioned themselves wherever the animal was. Wherever it went, and they never left it. Strong covered wooden towers were set on top of the elephants. Special harnesses were fastened on each animal. On each were 4 armed men who fought from there, and an Indian driver also. The remaining cavalry were stationed on either side of the elephants to harass the enemy while being protected inside the 2 flanks of the army. When the sun shone on the gold and brass shields, the hills looked like they were on fire from their reflection and glowed like burning torches. Part of the king's army was spread out on the high hills, and some troops were on the plain. They held their ranks and steadily moved forward. Everyone who heard the noise of marching feet and clanking arms trembled because the army was so very large and powerful. Nevertheless, Judas and his army went forth to do battle. 600 of the king's soldiers died. Eleazar, called Abaron, saw that one of the animals was taller than all the others and was equipped with royal armor. He figured that the king must be on it. So he gave his life to save his people and to secure an everlasting name for himself. He ran courageously into the midst of a group of soldiers to reach it, killing men right and left so that they had to give way to him on both sides. He got under the elephant and stabbed it from underneath. He killed it, but it fell to the ground on top of him, and he died there. As the Jews experienced the might and the fierce attack of the king's forces, they turned away and fled. The king's army went up to Jerusalem against them. The king camped in Judea and at Mount Zion. Now, notice something about this story. This was an overwhelming force, and the Jews, this is the first time they've turned and fled in the face of such. Is there anything conspicuously absent in this story versus the ones that we've read so far? There was no prayer. There was no appeal to God. There was no asking for his mercy for victory. They had gone out so many times they'd become self-confident. There's a story there. And that might very well preach, as they say. So the king's army went up to Jerusalem against them. The king camped in Judea and at Mount Zion. He made peace with the people of Bethzur. They evacuated the town because they lacked sufficient resources there to withstand a siege. It was a sabbatical year for the land. It was that Sabbath year, was every seven, in which the land should lie fallow and not be farmed. So the king took Bethzur and positioned a guard unit there to hold it. Then he camped in front of the sanctuary for many days. He set up siege towers, war engines that threw fire and rocks, machines to shoot darts and catapults. The Jews made war engines to match theirs, and they battled for many days. But they had no food in storage since it was the seventh year of the Sabbath year. Those people who had found safe haven in Judea from the Gentiles had eaten the last of the food. Only a few people remained in the sanctuary. The famine was so intense that the others had scattered to their own homes. So here, we find that they still have not asked for God's provisions. Then Lysias heard that King Antiochus, before he died, had appointed Philip to bring up Antiochus, his son, to be king. Philip had returned from Persia and Media with the forces that had gone with the king, and he was trying to seize control of the government. So Lysias quickly gave orders to withdraw and told the king, "The commanders of the forces and the troops, we're growing weaker every day because our food supply is scarce. The place we're fighting against is strong, and the affairs of the kingdom are pressing urgently on us. Let's come to terms now with these people and make peace with them and their nation. Let's agree to let them live by their laws like they used to do. It was because of their laws, which we abolished, that they got angry and did all these things." This speech pleased the king and the commanders, so he sent the Jews an offer of peace, which they accepted. The king and his commanders gave their word, so the Jews left the fortress. However, when the king went into Mount Zion and saw how securely the place was built, he went back on his word and ordered that the wall be torn down all around. Then he set off in a hurry to return to Antioch. He found that Philip was in control of the city, so he fought against him and took the city by force. So here, they have been defeated and they have surrendered because they didn't ask God's help. In the year 151, Demetrius, the son of Seleucus, set out from Rome. He sailed with a small group to a town by the sea and claimed the kingship there. So here we see some infighting for rule after the death of Antiochus Epiphanes. Even though he intended his son, several people are now contending for the throne. Demetrius, the son of Seleucus, set out from Rome. He sailed with a small group to a town by the sea and claimed the kingship there. As he entered the royal palace of his ancestors, the army seized Antiochus and Lysias, intending to bring them to him. But when he learned about this act, he said, "Don't let me see their faces." So the soldiers killed them. Demetrius then took his seat on the throne of the kingdom. So now Antiochus' son, Antiochus Eupator, as well as Lysias, have been killed, and there's a new king in town, Demetrius. So the soldiers killed them. Demetrius then took his seat on the throne of the kingdom. All the immoral and sinful Israelites came to him. Alcimus, who wanted to be high priest, led them. And they made an accusation to King Demetrius against the people. "Judas and his brothers have destroyed all your political advisors and have driven us out of our land. Now send someone that you trust to go and see all the ruin that Judas has brought on us and on the king's land. Let that person punish them and all who help them." The king selected Macabees, one of the king's chief political advisors and governor of the province called Beyond the River. He was a powerful man in the kingdom and was loyal to the king. The king sent him and sent the wicked Alcimus along with him. He made Alcimus high priest and authorized him to take vengeance on the Israelites. So they marched forward and came with a large force into the land of Judah. Macabees sent messengers to Judas and his brothers using peaceful but deceitful words. But they ignored the messengers because they saw they had come with a large military force. Then a group of legal experts came before Alcimus and Bacchides to ask for just terms. The Hasidians were the first among the Israelites to seek peace with them. This was the Hasidians, or Judas and his brothers. They said, a priest who is descended from Aaron has come with the army, and he won't harm us. Alcimus spoke peaceably to them and made a pledge to them. We won't seek to injure you or your friends. So they trusted him. But he seized 60 of them and killed them in one day. This was in keeping with the written word, the flesh of your faithful ones. And their blood they poured out all around Jerusalem, and there was no one to bury them. Then fear and dread came over all the people. They said, they are not truthful or just because they broke the promise they made. Bacchides retreated from Jerusalem and camped at Bethzaith. He captured the army. He captured many of the soldiers and some of the people who had deserted to his side. He killed them and threw them into a great pit. He put Alcimus in charge of the country and left a force to assist him. Then Bacchides went back to the king. Alcimus struggled to maintain the high priesthood. All the troublemakers joined him, and they gained control of Judah and did great damage in Israel. Judah saw all the wrongs that Alcimus and those with him had done among the Israelites, exceeding what the Gentiles had done. So Judah went into the surrounding Judean highlands and took vengeance on those who had deserted. He prevented them from going out into the country. When Alcimus saw that Judah and his companions had grown strong, he knew he couldn't resist them. So he returned to the king and brought spiteful charges against them. So here we see a trend that's beginning and will largely continue, where they had once depended upon the everlasting arms of God. They're now beginning to trust in their own might. And that will eventually lead them, as we'll see, into an alliance with Rome, an ill-advised alliance with Rome, and a correspondence with Sparta, which has some interesting content. We're going to find out the Spartans are a lot closer related to the Judeans than most people imagine. So the king sent for Nicanor, one of his honored princes who hated and despised Israel, and the king commanded him to destroy the people. So Nicanor went to Jerusalem with a large force. He deceitfully sent a peaceful message to Judas and his brothers. Let there be no fighting between you and me. I'll come with a few men to see you personally in peace. So he came to Judas, and they greeted each other peaceably, but the enemy was preparing to kidnap Judas. Judas found out that Nicanor had come to him with treacherous intent, and he was afraid of him and wouldn't meet Nicanor again. And when Nicanor learned that his plan had been discovered, he went out to meet Judas in battle near Kfar Salamah. About 500 of Nicanor's soldiers died. The rest fled into David's city. After these events, Nicanor went up to Mount Zion. Some priests from the sanctuary and some of the elders of the people came out to greet him peacefully. They pointed out to him the entirely burned offering that was being offered on behalf of the king. But he mocked, ridiculed, and defiled them, and spoke in an arrogant way. Angrily he swore, unless Judas and his army are handed over to me this time, I will burn down this house if I return safely in the future, meaning the temple. And he departed in great fury. Then the priests went inside and stood before the altar and the temple, and they wept out loud and said, You, Heavenly One, chose this house to be called by your name and to be a house of prayer and petition for your people. Take vengeance on this man and on his army. Make them die by the sword. Remember their evil slander and don't let them live any longer. So now the priests of the temple, even dominated by an evil high priest, now begin to appeal to God. Now Nicanor, along with the Syrian army, left Jerusalem and camped at Beth Horon. Judas camped at Adasa with 3,000 men. So here's Judas now down to 3,000 men with the entire Syrian army in occupation of Jerusalem and camping against him. And finally, I think he realizes that he needs to do what he had failed to do before. So Judas camped in Adasa with 3,000 men. Then Judas prayed. When the messengers from the king, this is his prayer. When the messengers of the king of the Assyrians insulted us with words, your angel went out and struck down 185,000. So crush this army before us today. Let the rest learn that he has spoken against your sanctuary in an evil way, and judge him for this wickedness. So the armies met in battle on the 13th day of the month of Adar. Nicanor's army was crushed, and he himself was the first to die in the battle. When his army saw that Nicanor had died, they threw down their weapons and fled. The Jews pursued them a day's journey from Adasa to Gazara. As they followed them, they kept blasting the battle call on the trumpets. People came out of the surrounding Judean villages. They outflanked the enemy and drove them back toward their pursuers so that they all died by the sword. Not a single one of them was left alive. What a difference the prayer made. Not by might, not by power. The two olive trees of the Revelation are alive. Then the Jews seized the spoils and the goods left behind. They cut off Nicanor's head and his right hand, which he had arrogantly stretched out. They brought them and displayed them just outside Jerusalem. They established this day as a day of annual celebration on the 13th day of Adar. And the land of Judah enjoyed peace for a while. Great story, a lot to learn there. Now, as I said a little while ago, Maccabees had made a terrible mistake in abandoning prayer there temporarily. But they had begun to have the idea that the arm of flesh could save them, and started depending less on the everlasting arms of God. And you notice the character of the prayer, even though the prayer resulted in victory, the character of the prayer has changed a bit here in the story. Instead of imploring God and accepting his will, live or die, it's just crush them, God, crush them. Well, it's not we are weak and you are strong. Now we are strong, but you are stronger, God. And what we see next is one of the most tragic events in this history that's recounted in 1 Maccabees. The story is beginning that will lead up to the sorry state of affairs 120 years or so when Jesus comes. Now Judas heard about the Romans' reputation for being strong and loyal to all who made an alliance with them. So now the Romans are starting to look a little better. And rather than trusting God forward, you're now beginning to think about trusting the Romans. You kind of have an idea how that turned out, just knowing the story of the New Testament Gospels. Now Judas heard about the Romans' reputation for being strong and loyal to all who made an alliance with them. They pledged friendship to those who came to them. They were very powerful. Judas had been told of their wars and of the brave deeds that they were doing among the Gauls. how they had defeated them and forced them to pay tribute. He was told what they had done in Spain to get control of the silver and gold mines there. They gained control over the entire region through their planning and patience, even though the place was a great distance from them. They also subdued the kings from the ends of the earth who fought against them until they crushed them and inflicted heavy casualties on them. The rest paid annual fines to them. They crushed in battle and conquered Philip and King Perseus of the Macedonians, as well as others who rose up against them. They also defeated Antiochus the Great, king of Asia, who went to fight against them with 120 elephants, with cavalry chariots and a very large army. They crushed him, but they took him alive. They declared that he and those who succeeded him should pay a heavy fine and turn over hostages as well as some of their best territories. These included the countries of India, Media, Lydia. They took them from Antiochus and gave them to King Eumenes. Now, this is Antiochus Epiphanes' son, Eupator. This is kind of a retrospective story. These included the countries of India, Media, and Lydia. They took them from Antiochus and gave them to Eumenes. The Greeks thought about coming to destroy them, but the Romans became aware of this, so they sent a general against the Greeks and attacked them. Many Greeks were wounded and died. The Romans took their wives and children captive. They plundered them, conquered their land, tore down their fortresses, and enslaved them to this day. They destroyed and enslaved many of the remaining kingdoms and islands that opposed them. But the Romans have kept friendship with their allies and those who rely on them. Those who rely on the Romans rather than rely on God. Wonder how that's going to turn out. They have subdued kings far and near, and as many as have heard of their reputation have feared them. Those whom they wish to help come to power, they make kings. Those whom they wish, they bring down. The Romans have been greatly exalted. Yet even with all this, not one of them has put a crown or worn purple as a mark of pride. Not yet. That will change. Instead, they built for themselves a Senate chamber. Daily, 320 senators planned constantly concerning their people in order to govern them well. They trust one man each year to rule over them and control all their land. They all listen to this one man, and there is no envy or jealousy among the Romans. Romans look pretty good here in their Republican days, in the Republic of Rome, where the Senate rules and appoint the rulers. Caesar has not yet come on the scene, so the Romans look really good to them. They think they can trust them. They are powerful after all. They take their eyes off the Almighty God and cast their gaze upon the mighty Romans. So Judas chose Eupolemus, the son of John and grandson of Achus, and also Jason, Eleazar's son. He sent them to Rome to establish friendship, alliance, and also to free the Jewish people from oppression. They observed that the Greek kingdom was completely enslaving Israel. And they took the long journey to Rome, and they entered the Senate chamber, and they spoke. Judas, called Macabees, along with his brothers and the Jewish people, has sent us to you to establish alliance and peace with you. We seek to be enrolled as your allies and friends. This proposal pleased the Romans. This is a copy of the letter that they wrote in reply on bronze tablets, which they sent to Jerusalem to remain with them there as a memorial of peace and alliance. May all go well with the Romans and with the nation of the Jews at sea and on land forever. May sword and enemy stay away from them. If war comes first to Rome or to any of their allies through their territory, the Jewish nation should act as their allies wholeheartedly, as the occasion may indicate to them. They will not give or supply grain, weapons, money, or ships to an enemy that makes war on them, meaning the Romans. This is Rome's decision, and they will keep their obligations without compensation. In the same way, if war comes first to the nation of the Jews, the Romans will willingly act as their allies, as the occasion may indicate to them. They will not give to their enemies any grain, weapons, money, or ships, just as Rome has decided, and they will keep these obligations and do so without deceit. On these terms, the Romans make a treaty with the Jewish people. After these terms are in effect and either party determines to add or delete anything, they will do so at their discretion. Any addition or deletion that they may make will be valid. Non-binding resolution of alliance. That will change. Regarding the bad things that King Demetrius is doing to them, we have written to him, "Why have you made your yoke so heavy on our friends and allies, the Jews? If they appeal now again for help against you, we will defend their rights and fight you on both sea and land." I think we're going to stop right there because we'll get to a different phase. But here we have seen the demise of Antiochus Epiphanes, just like the amazing prophecy of Daniel foretold. We have seen the disaster that befell the Jews when they abandoned prayer. And then when they restored their prayer, it was not like before. And they began to doubt the providence of God that had brought them to this place and had restored their nation and the messianic light. And now they make the terrible mistake of depending on Rome. And when Pompey the Great comes in 63 BC, he sieges and destroys Jerusalem again, and Rome then rules the land. So that's what the message here is. Don't abandon prayer, and don't ever trust in your strength or the strength of others over the provision and might of the Almighty God. Till later.